Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Why Whales and Dolphins Are Everyone's Business, presented by Global Lead for WWF's Protecting Whales and Dolphins Initiative, Chris Johnson, who is joining us today from Australia. It is so great to have you with us today, Chris. I know it's very early for you, so I especially appreciate you being here today. I'm going to hand it off to you.
No, thanks, Kendall. It's great to be here, and thanks everybody for calling in to learn more about why whales and dolphins are everyone's business and a little bit about what we do at WWF. So just to start, I wanted to give you a little bit of background on where I've started studying whales and where my journey started. And it was actually on a project called the Voyage of the Odyssey. It was an expedition co-funded by WWF US and many other foundations based in the United States. And it was a 5.5-year global study of whales and ocean pollution. So that's actually still on PBS online. So traveled all over the tropics, searching for sperm whales, looking at how ocean pollution are affecting or impacting populations worldwide. And it was a pretty incredible project. Got to see a lot of the conservation issues that I'm going to talk about today firsthand in all of our seas. So I got to visit 22 countries over 5.5 years. It was a pretty amazing project. And I worked for a biologist named Roger Payne. And Roger is famous for, along with his wife, Katie and Scott McVeigh, discovering in the 1960s that humpback whales sing songs. So the vocalizations that males produce have different patterns and rhythms, and these complex vocalizations were discovered as songs. And let me play a little bit of what that sounds like. About 50 years ago, Roger put out this book called Songs of the Humpback Whale, which absolutely changed the way we look at the species and how we view it today. So it's pretty amazing to listen to that now and to see how it's really changed whale conservation, which I'll talk a little bit about now. So after the Odyssey, I started with World Wildlife Fund about 7 years ago. I've been running the Antarctic program for about 5 years and just stepped into this new role, leading our whale and dolphin conservation work worldwide. So whales and dolphins are really flagship species of our oceans. They're a symbol of a healthy sea. When you see a humpback whale breaching out of the water, it's a real symbol that these oceans or that ocean is healthy and thriving. And in fact, whales are the top of the marine food web and play an important role in the overall health to our oceans. And protecting populations can conserve other species and even whole ecosystems because of their broad range. And in fact, new evidence and research is showing that whales aren't just incredible flagship species, but they're really important to people and nature. They do everything from regulate climate in ecosystems. So new evidence has shown that whales over their lifetime capture a significant amount of carbon, equivalent to about 1,000 trees during their lifetime. And basically their poo acts as kind of a fertilizer of the ocean, which then in turn helps phytoplankton blooms. And phytoplankton is crucial to us because it produces between 50 to 60% of all oxygen on Earth. And so whales are crucial to enhancing the ocean productivity with benefits to people, but it also can have benefits to our fisheries as well. And we have this massive global tourism market, which has been impacted by COVID recently, of whale and dolphin watching worldwide, which is worth about $2 billion. So whales are crucial to not only the environment, but they provide benefits to us. And they come in all shapes and sizes, everything from tiny harbor porpoises to narwhals in the Arctic, to dolphins with spots, these Atlantic spotted dolphins, to beluga whales, to sperm whales, which are my favorite. They're often called the elephants of the sea. They live in family groups and matriarchal societies and have these really complex cultures. Southern right whales. But we're also learning more and more about whales every year. So for example, last year, there's a line of whales called beaked whales, and they're the most unknown of all species of whale. They live offshore, deep water trenches, and we're discovering more and more of these deep diving toothed whales. And in September 2020, scientists put a tag on an animal and recorded the longest ever dive of any whale, of over 3 hours and 42 minutes, holding its breath on one breath of air, which is pretty incredible. But even as recent as January, we've discovered a new whale species called the rice whale. And this is through kind of genetics work that's been done over the years. But unfortunately, it's a kind of it's a mixed bag on this, because even though we've discovered this new species, scientists have discovered that there are only less than 100 left remaining. So they're already in trouble. And speaking of trouble, so whales are really, some populations have bounced back, some are at risk, and this led to over 350 scientists and conservationists from 40 different countries to sign a letter in September calling for global action to protect cetaceans from extinction. In fact, out of 90 species of whales, dolphins, and porpoises, 30 are listed as threatened by the World Conservation Union, the IUCN, and 50% have a concerning conservation status. And this is partly to do with 20th century whaling. So 20th century whaling reduced a number of large whale populations, driving many species to the brink of extinction. Some have bounced back, like humpback whales, which have been one of the greatest success stories of the 20th centuries. Others, like Antarctic blue whales, have been incredibly slow to recover, and we're still trying to understand why. But we have species around the world, big and small, affected by this. So the vaquita porpoise in Mexico, there are less than 10 animals left, and they're dying in gill nets as a result of accidental capture in fisheries nets. Maui's dolphins in New Zealand number about less than 60. But even in the United States, we have North Atlantic right whales, which migrate between Canada and the United States. They're less than 360, and they've just been added to the, they've been listed as critically endangered back in July 2020, with less than a population of 360. Now, the North Atlantic right whales are being impacted by three things. Climate change is driving them further north, which is putting them at harm's risk with different fishing gear. So this is a right whale that's been entangled by gear on lobster gear. But they also navigate really busy shipping lanes on the East Coast of the United States. And so oftentimes they are hit or impacted by ships. So right whales, we're seeing that their health is actually decreasing because they have these multiple impacts throughout their lifetime, which is of great concern, which is affecting their population. But in fact, an estimated 300,000 whales, dolphins, and porpoises are killed each year as a result of fisheries bycatch. That's accidental entangle in nets and lines and ropes. But populations are also being impacted by ship strikes and ship traffic, and a loss of important habitat by climate change, crucial to survival. And so these are some of the things we see on our ocean. This is a fin whale, the second largest animal on the planet, and this is taken in the Mediterranean Sea. This animal lost half of its fluke, which is crucial for navigating and diving and feeding. And sometimes it's out of our hands. And this is a picture of a mass stranding of pilot whales in Tasmania in September. There are many theories on why some whale species beach themselves. Pilot whales are incredibly social. They have strong family bonds. this particular area in Tasmania has a very narrow opening, and animals got caught in the tide. And so the theory is one theory is that one sick animal leads the entire pod into danger, and they just can't leave that their family member behind. But also pollution, and I just wanted to show you a quick video on that we did last month on plastic pollution. So even our actions at home can affect animals in the sea, like whales, and here's just a short video on plastics. So plastics is impacting animals in a few different ways, both through ingestion, through fisheries bycatch, because the nets are made of plastic, they don't break down, and they keep impacting animals. Once they've caught an animal and killed an animal, it can keep on killing. But also it breaks down into invisible compounds, which is working up the food chain and impacting a number of different species. And that's where we don't know. We see plastic, while we see chemical compounds in the blubber of whales and dolphins, and that's accumulating through their lifetime, and they're passing it down to their young. And we don't know what the true impact of that's going to be. So how have we dealt with these things? So WF has been a leader in whale and dolphin conservation for over 50 years. And these efforts have resulted in a deeper understanding of the species and their habitats. And we've worked to have major shifts in policy and practice from both a local level to a global level. And this is just a snapshot of some of the projects that we have in progress at the moment around the world. And we work on a range of different species with a range of people, both with scientists, conservation community, we work with industry sometimes, we work with indigenous communities, but we really try to bring about this change in policy. So we really work hard to bring science to policy to have impact for whales and dolphins. And there's a report we did a couple of years ago called Turning the Tide, which mapped what we've done over 50 years. And our response, to some of these new threats and accumulation of threats, like I talked about with North Atlantic right whales, is to launch a new global strategy called the WWF Protecting Whales and Dolphins Initiative. We launched it in July 2020, and it's hosted by WWF Australia. So I'm based in Melbourne, originally from the United States, and work with different experts all around the world. And we work together to protect whales and dolphins. And this is our team. It's a pretty amazing team from a wide range of skills. So we have expertise in science, conservation, we have policy experts, campaigning and communications, working together to achieve impact. And our main goals are to safeguard species and secure ocean habitats. By 2030, we're working to protect 30% of our oceans. With a whole range of teams. And how we do it, we do three things. We enable science and on-ground conservation. So we work with partners, whether they are scientists or community-based, to help fill gaps in funding to design innovative solutions. We work to be a voice for whales and dolphins. We highlight how human activities such as bycatch, shipping, and climate change are impacting whales and dolphins, and we provide actions for both individuals, businesses, and governments. And we work to influence international and national policy through science-based campaigns and reports. We do everything from launching policy reports. These are the few links to a few of them that we've released over the past few months. We also collaborate with groups like the IUCN or the World Conservation Union to identify where the most important areas for whales and dolphins are around the world and delineate these areas for future protection by governments. We provide conservation grants to science groups. So we're looking at how we can use innovation to address some of these critical conservation issues. But also we try to launch new strategies, and this is a piece called Protecting Blue Corridors. We're working to protect the most critical habitat for migratory whales. We're launching a new report and strategy in June 2020 that we're targeting the United Nations. There's a new agreement called the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty. So 63% of our oceans are technically not governed by anyone. They're called the high seas. And this treaty has been in negotiation for about 10 years, and this will help put in a structure, a governance structure, where we can actually protect the most important areas of our oceans and connect the breeding grounds, say of humpback whales, to their foraging grounds. And I'll show you a little graphic on what that means. Because whales rely on these connections between breeding areas and areas where they feed. And some species navigate really far distances. On the upper left-hand corner is just a simple visualization of gray whale migration from the Arctic down to Mexico each year. The lower left-hand corner is the Southern Ocean, as humpback whales moving throughout the Southern Ocean. And we have, of course, Hawaii, humpbacks moving between Hawaii and Alaska. And we're finding in our research, working with scientists and producing this report right now, is that whales are facing an increasingly dangerous journey on their epic migrations. For example, this is a screenshot of Chinese distant water fishing vessels in August 2020 outside the exclusive economic zone of the Galapagos Islands. And it's legal to do this. You can fish anywhere on the high seas, and those white dots are are hundreds of fishing boats. But we have things like oil spills that happen in critical habitat for whales and dolphins. This is an oil spill that happened in Mauritius, which then a couple weeks later there was a connected die-off of dolphins. But shipping, a lot of shipping happens right through critical whale habitat. This is an example of a blue whale and a container ship in southern Sri Lanka, one of the most busy shipping routes that connects Asia to the Mediterranean Sea. And we're working to basically identify these critical shipping routes that go through whale habitat and provide options for the industry through the International Maritime Organization. And so this is an example case study. The blue dots are humpback whale migration between Colombia, which is their breeding ground, to the Antarctic Peninsula, which is their feeding ground. So although we've stopped whaling and numbers of species have bounced back, like humpback whales, we're seeing that there's trouble ahead. For example, in the breeding areas in Ecuador and Colombia, there's increased rates of bycatch, so interactions with fishing in what's called ghost gear. Ghost gear is discarded fishing gear that basically has been tossed over or lost, and nobody knows where it is, and it's a growing concern. Climate change in the tropics. One theory is it could be impacting migration cues, so changing the when whales migrate south to feed. The migration corridors, they're seeing increased encounters with fishing, but also ship traffic in places like the Magellan Strait in Chile, where whales are overlapping with shipping lanes at certain times of the year. And on the Antarctic Peninsula, we're seeing climate change impacting their prey, Antarctic krill, and I'll show you an illustration of that in a moment. And there's an increasing commercial krill fishery. So on this journey, which is 8,500 kilometers long, they head south to feed for 5 months in the summer months, and then they turn around and head back to the breeding grounds, and they do this every single year. And it's something we take for granted, whale migration. So we're working to visualize the problem and communicate solutions. And here's our team working on this report from a variety of universities and WWF offices globally. This is a screenshot of some of our work in progress. And we're drafting case studies for the United Nations to show these significant choke points, we're calling them, where there is a lot of human impacts and its crucial whale habitat. So the blue dots on the map are blue whale tracks. So there's blue whales on California down to Mexico. It's crucial habitat. And this whole corridor, we're looking at how do we better manage and protect it and provide evidence and advice for policymakers to do so. So for us, we do conservation through collaboration. And this is the key thing I learned working in Antarctica. Antarctica is so remote, it's so expensive, and it takes everyone to come together to both work together on the grounds through science, but also through policy to protect it. So this is something that I'm taking forward in this new role, is how do we have better collaboration in our conservation work? How do we bring people together? Because Antarctica is such a special case that I just want to share it with everybody. And we have countries working together like Russia and China and the United States working on the ground to look at issues around climate change or look at issues of species. And you know, it is a really special place. And in fact, there's a whole network of what's called marine protected areas that have been proposed. And so a vast area of Southern Ocean already has the largest marine protected area on the planet, called the Ross Sea MPA. It's the size of Germany, France, and Spain combined in land size. It's absolutely huge. But we have these other proposals, including on the Antarctic Peninsula. And so governments have committed to this network. There's some geopolitics that have gotten in the way over the past few years, but we're really hopeful that there's a new commitment by governments in what's called 30 by 30, and that's protecting 30% of our oceans by 2030. And by protecting these crucial areas for wildlife, connecting this kind of Southern Ocean feeding bowl to the most crucial breeding habitats, at least in the Southern Hemisphere, it's something we want to look at replicating in other areas around the world. And because Antarctic krill is crucial for whales, and this is a commercial krill fishing vessel, they're not just small fishing boats, they're industrial trawlers. And krill fishing used to happen all around the continent. Now it's focused on the Antarctic Peninsula, and climate change is causing them to move south. The Antarctic Peninsula is warmed by about 5 degrees Fahrenheit, so 2.8 degrees centigrade. Hopefully that's the right conversion. And it's a worry that we have a lot of different fishing pressure there, but we're also growing tourism, which has been impacted this year, but it's something we're keeping watch on, is our footprint on Antarctica. But sometimes we have these unexpected conservation wins, and because we work with scientists, industry, businesses, government, we can get these unexpected wins. So for example, in December, I was part of a group from Pew Charitable Trust and Greenpeace that negotiated a closure of krill fishing on the Antarctic Peninsula year-round in an area called Hope Bay. Now, Hope Bay is an unbelievable place. It is lots of whales, killer whales, minke whales, but also penguins. So by closing areas that are crucial for wildlife can help them bounce back and thrive. So this is a nice thing that happens, but we're also looking to scale this to a larger protected area. I couldn't take you to Antarctica today, but I thought I'd end my talk before we have questions to show you just a 2-minute video of our work behind the scenes in Antarctica and what a special place it is.
So we're working with the team, with our science team from University of California, Santa Cruz and Duke University to really dive deep into what's happening here and what are the solutions and actions we need to take back home. We're using new technologies here on the Antarctic Peninsula to better understand the lives of whales, why they're coming here to feed, how they feed, but also how climate change is affecting their prey, tiny Antarctic krill.
Krill are very dependent on the sea ice they protect to grow. So as the sea ice and the changes in these areas, then we're going to see fluctuations in the krill availability, and that's what most of these animals are feeding on these areas. WWF have been a great support of and helping really facilitate a lot of the work, getting tags and equipment of that out to the field and collecting the data that we need.
The goal of WWF in Antarctica is to protect 30% of the ocean surrounding the continent by 2030. Marine protected areas will create a safety net around the continent, and it'll be an insurance policy for wildlife.
So on that note, happy to take any questions that you have, and thank you very much for spending time this morning with me.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. We've got some good questions for you, and I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question for Chris today, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, very quickly, could you repeat the name of the PBS documentary that you recommended at the beginning?
Oh, so it was part of a project called The Voyage of the Odyssey. So it's pbs.org/Odyssey. And what it was an online series. It was quite unique. We were blogging before blogging was even a term. We had a satellite in the back of the boat, and we would basically share stories every day. It looks a bit old now. It's 20 years old, so it's definitely the old internet. But it was targeted for students, primarily middle school to high school students, and it has some very relevant stories still about our oceans.
Great. Are ocean-based shipping companies working with WWF to protect whales?
Yeah, so there are a few different options, especially for shipping companies and shipping routes. And we're actually putting out a report next month on this for the International Maritime Organization. There are a few different options, whether it's slowdown rules or shifting shipping lanes and crucial habitats. It's been done around the world, specifically in Panama. There's a humpback whale population in Panama at certain times of year, and the shipping lane, so a scientist, Hector Guzman, was able to shift the shipping lane, which both helped protect most of the habitat, but allowed shipping to occur through the Panama Canal. So it can happen. It takes a long time to do that, and that's one of the great things about WWF is that we are there for the long term.
And can you go into a little bit more detail about your work in Antarctica and why it was chosen for protection?
Yeah, so Antarctica is an incredible place. WWF's been working in Antarctica for about 30 years, and we've done everything from work with partners to establish the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary through the International Whaling Commission, to invest in different research over the years, especially using what I've been working on, using digital tags. So these tiny tags that are the size of an iPhone that you put on the back of whales to figure out not only where they're feeding, but they have cameras in them to show how they're feeding. And we're using this information to inform policymakers of the most important areas to protect for whales, but also for penguins and seals. Basically wildlife that feeds on tiny Antarctic krill, which is the engine of the Southern Ocean food chain. So my work, go into the field, been to Antarctica a number of times, working with our science partners, but we also work with tourism too, and use tourism ships as a platform to launch our projects off of. And then we share the day's work or the day's research with people who are really keen on learning more about Antarctica. And then I'll take that to a global policy meeting called the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Living Marine Resources, and it's called CAMLAR is the acronym. And that's where governments have made this commitment to implement a network of marine protected areas. They did this in 2010. It's been slow to deliver because of just increasing geopolitics. So that's a little bit of snapshot on what our work is like in Antarctica.
Mm-hmm. There was quite a bit of curiosity about Rice's whale and how it was actually discovered.
That's a great question. What I know, it's through genetics, and sometimes what we do is we're looking at a whale. It looks like a Brutus whale, which is a different species of whale, and it might have slightly different characteristics. And sometimes it takes a number of years to do photo ID research and genetics research. So taking tiny skin samples from an animal, and then breaking down that genetic code. And what scientists have found is that it was a different species of animal, even though it looked similar to another species of whale.
All right. And someone was wondering about how whales are able to capture so much carbon.
That's a great question. It's just through their lifetime, they breathe at the surface. They they capture carbon and store it in their body through their lifetime, and when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean and capture that carbon that accumulated through their life.
Has China signed the UN Biodiversity Agreement for the high seas that you mentioned?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't lead our high seas work, but I can follow up after this.
And there was also quite a bit of curiosity about different countries and who may be, leading the way in terms of whale and other environmental protections, and who may be lagging behind. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd probably say a number of countries are leading the way. I'd probably say Japan is still not. I mean, Japan has stopped whaling in the Southern Ocean last year, and they've pulled out of what's called the International Whaling Commission, or the IWC. So they're only whaling now in their own national waters. So I'd say Japan's lagging behind. They're still whaling in countries like Norway and Iceland, but there are a number of countries who are investing in whale conservation, like the United States and Canada and Australia, so New Zealand. So even though we do have these threats, there are a lot of governments around the world who want to do the right thing.
Mm-hmm. And are you aware of any international efforts to pick up or filter out the plastic flotsam in the high seas?
There was an international plastics treaty that's being negotiated now that some countries are signing on to. So there's two things we can do. There's, in terms of the fishing gear, the ghost gear, there's something called the Ghost Gear Initiative, which is an initiative that are getting national governments to sign on to implement strategies so nets don't enter the water at all. Nets are labeled and nets are cleaned up or taken out of our seas. But with the International Plastics Treaty, that has to do with our entire economy. So not letting any plastics enter the ocean. And that is a big, it's a lot of work that we're doing at WWF. We've had a global plastics campaign this year. And we this year wanted to highlight that even whales and dolphins are being impacted by this issue of single-use plastics entering the ocean.
So a few people were wondering about the ships and the sounds they make, or vibrations maybe that they give off that could potentially move the whales out of their way. There's concern about the impact, the physical impact of a whale and a ship together. Is there any sort of sound warning system or alert system that ships are using?
Well, with ships, there's two things. There's underwater noise pollution, so the noise that propellers make and that ships make, and that is in a shipping lane with, say, there's 4 or 5 different large ships around, that can have a what's called a masking effect with animals. So not only impacts their ability to feed or forage, so animals like sperm whales, they use sound to see underwater. They make these clicking sounds. It's a biosonar to both navigate and to forage on squid. So the more sound there is, the more that is potentially masking their ability to feed. But also it masks an animal's ability to communicate with its young, potentially. And we're seeing growing evidence of the impacts of underwater noise on marine life as a whole. But with ship strikes, it's really tricky because you think that whales would just get out of the way of a ship because they're making so much noise. Species like blue whales in California don't. What they do is they sink to the surface, sink right under the water, so a ship can't see it when it's under stress. So instead of fleeing, it sinks underwater and just under the surface and can get hit by a ship. So the whales aren't adapting as quick as we want them to or like them to, which is one of the issues. Is why we're looking at different policies to put in place to either move shipping lanes or to slow down in certain key areas, but also map where whales are in real time. There's a program called Whale Safe in California off of LA, which is an alert system for when animals are in certain areas, and that alert goes to mariners in real time, which is pretty cool project. So we're trying to look at this in a number of different ways using technology and policy.
Mm-hmm. And where does the U.S. stand on these treaties and policies that you've mentioned?
We're hopeful the U.S. will become more active in the international sphere again. I think I not only can comment on the work I've done at CAMLAR over the past 4 years, where the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area was passed in 2016. It was led by the United States and New Zealand. They were the drivers, so countries have to sponsor these large marine protected areas at CAMLAR in the Southern Ocean Commission. But they've been more of a quiet voice on the international stage over the past 4 years. So we're hoping that will change. And they've made a big commitment to the 30 by 30 campaign just recently, which is really exciting, both protecting United States waters and also international waters. So that's a great sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, going back to Rice's whale, there were a couple more questions, so I'll combine them. Since it was just recently discovered, how do we know that there are so few left, and what would be the possible cause of their demise?
That's a great question. I can't really say. I think since it's such a new discovery, they would have done the genetics on, and looked at the population of what potentially of animals they have photos of. So we can study individual animals through the photos of their flukes. So I don't know how they've come up with the way. I haven't, I'd have to investigate this further for you.
Okay. Someone wants to know how much more area needs to be protected and what kind of fishing regulations might be needed in an ideal world to protect the whales and dolphins.
Yeah, so that's a great question. About, I'd say 8.5% of our oceans are protected, give or take a half a percentage on that. Now we had a commitment to protect 10% of our oceans by 2020, and we didn't hit it, unfortunately. We were close, but we didn't get over the line. Now scientists in the IUCN are saying we need to protect at least 30% of our seas by 2030. Thus this whole 30 by 30 campaign, you'll be hearing a lot more from governments and NGOs over the next few years. Now that's crucial, and it's not just protecting any part of the ocean, it's protecting these key areas. So there are initiatives in place like the key biodiversity areas, which are areas being nominated by governments that are crucial for a range of wildlife, including whales and dolphins. there's an initiative by the IUCN called Important Marine Mammal Areas, which something I talked about earlier in the talk, which are looking at the most critical habitats. So areas for feeding, for breeding, for migrating. These areas are, that's been an initiative over the past few years, and they're going ocean by ocean to nominate these areas. And that'll actually help policymakers make these decisions on where to protect the most effective areas for wildlife. And I think that's the key, is what are the most effective areas of oceans that we need to protect, and we need at least 30% by 2030. So that's the big push now.
And yeah, you were just talking about 30 by 30. There were some people who were just wondering if you could give a little bit more background on that campaign.
It's really developed from, I think, us not hitting the 10% campaign. It's just we're doing more research on, what is the minimum we need to protect. There's even calls for protecting half Earth, protecting half of our oceans and land. But this has just been a movement from the IUCN, World Conservation Union, and through the science community that NGOs have taken up the call, and to urge governments to move towards this quickly. But also in terms of climate change, we know that we have very little time to respond to climate, our changing climate. One way we can protect wildlife is to create these ocean sanctuaries where we limit direct human impacts and allow them to adapt. It's not perfect, but it does help protect crucial areas of our oceans, and in terms of allowing species to thrive, like different fish species, and to bounce back, and protect animals like whales and dolphins if it's their most crucial, critical habitats for feeding, breeding, or migrating.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of public awareness campaigns are going on in certain countries that, you mentioned earlier, maybe lagging behind a little bit?
There's a number of different campaigns now, whether it's through other NGOs, whether it's through World Wildlife Fund. There's building momentum around the 30 by 30 campaign. Again, you'll be hearing a lot more about this. WWF has had this global plastics campaign this year, which is really calling on countries to have a global plastics treaty. So we stop plastics from entering the ocean, because we know it's such a big issue, and it got a lot of publicity, and again, it's been impacted by COVID, among other things. So we do have a number of different campaigns that are interlinked, and we work with a lot of different nonprofits and business and governments to achieve that.
Someone wrote in, 300,000 whales dying every year sounds almost hopeless. What can citizens do to offset the vast fishing and whale strike issues?
Yeah, that's so 300,000. That's an estimate for fisheries bycatch. That's a great question, and it's tricky because we don't know in some areas around the world, like in the Indian Ocean, we don't know the true number. So this is an estimate, but we do. For us, it's really the greatest threat for whales and dolphins is bycatch, and it's something that we're working hard at WWF to change by investing in some science in terms of getting better estimates of what's happening, where it's happening, how we can make a difference, but also working with different policymakers in whether it's regional fisheries organizations. So there are how do we better have better fishing methods? How do we reduce bycatch in certain fisheries around the world? How do we remove ghost nets or deal with ghost net issue? And that's through this new Ghost Gear initiative. So we're really trying to take a number of different pathways to basically reduce the issue as soon as we can.
Okay, and last question I'll take today, and I do apologize, we had so many questions today, we didn't have time to get to all of them, but someone was wondering where you recommend seeing blue whales. Her dream is to see and experience a blue whale. Where would you recommend going?
boy. It depends. So you can do in California, you can see blue whales. You can see blue whales in Canada. You can see, or Eastern Canada. You can see blue whales in Southern Sri Lanka as well. Is a good place to go whale watching when things open up. But it's those are probably the best spots to see blue whales.
Okay, great. Thank you. And a few people were wondering about how to make donations to World Wildlife Fund. So I recommend just going to their website and checking out the information on their website. And you can even contact them if you have further questions. Okay, Chris, thank you so much for getting up early and presenting for us today. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to hand it back over to you for any closing comments you'd like to make.
Well, thanks everybody for calling in, and yeah, definitely follow up with the World Wildlife Fund website if you'd like some more information. If you'd like some more information about the initiative, you can go to wwf.whales.org, and that you can learn more about the team, what we're doing, how we're doing it. But feel free to reach out anytime if you have any more questions to my email. So no, thank you for calling in, and really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Chris. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, and we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.